The scar running down Penelope Barrett's left cheek burned in the Texas heat as she stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Brownsville, carrying everything she owned in a single worn carpet bag. The year was 1876, and she had traveled 300 miles from San Antonio with one purpose: to disappear into a place where nobody knew her story, where the whispers and pitying glances could not follow. At 24 years old, she had already resigned herself to a lifetime alone, convinced that no man would ever look past the jagged reminder of the fire that had killed her parents and nearly claimed her life 6 years ago. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the main street, where a handful of weathered buildings stood against the harsh landscape near the Rio Grande. Brownsville sat at the southernmost tip of Texas, a rough town where cultures collided and opportunity beckoned those brave or desperate enough to seek it. Penelope fell into the latter category. She had answered an advertisement for a seamstress position, one of the few respectable jobs available to a woman alone, and prayed her skills with needle and thread would be enough to secure her independence. The seamstress shop stood between the general store and a saloon, its painted sign already fading in the relentless sun. Penelope pushed through the door, grateful for the shade inside. An older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun looked up from her work, her sharp eyes immediately finding the scar. Penelope forced herself not to turn away, holding her ground as she always did when someone noticed. "You must be Miss Barrett," the woman said, her voice neither warm nor cold. "I am Mrs. Henderson. You are punctual, which is a promising start." "Yes, madam, thank you for this opportunity." Penelope set down her bag carefully, her hands steady despite the familiar tightening in her chest that came with meeting new people. Mrs. Henderson stood, walking a slow circle around Penelope as though inspecting livestock. "The advertisement mentioned you could do fine embroidery work." "Yes, madam. I brought samples." Penelope reached into her bag and produced a carefully wrapped bundle of fabric. She unfolded it to reveal delicate flowers and vines stitched in vibrant threads, the work so precise it resembled a painting. For the first time, something resembling approval flickered across Mrs. Henderson's face. "This is exceptional work. You will do. I can offer you room and board in the space above the shop, plus a small wage. The work is steady here." Many of the ranchers' wives come to town only a few times a year and place large orders. Relief flooded through Penelope's chest. "That is more than generous. I accept." "Good. I will show you to your room and you can start tomorrow morning. There is a water pump out back and an outhouse behind the building. We keep respectable hours here, and I expect the same of you." Mrs. Henderson's eyes lingered on the scar once more. "I will not pry into your past, Miss Barrett, and I expect you to extend the same courtesy to me and our customers." "Of course, madam." The room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Penelope unpacked her few belongings, hanging the 2 dresses she owned on pegs driven into the wall. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she stood at the window and watched the town settle into evening. Men emerged from various businesses, some heading into the saloon, others mounting horses tied to hitching posts. It was a world she had observed from the margins for years now, never expecting to be part of it in any meaningful way. Sleep came fitfully that first night, as it usually did in new places. Penelope dreamed of fire and woke gasping, her fingers tracing the scar in the darkness until her heartbeat slowed. She had learned to live with the nightmares, just as she had learned to live with the certainty that she would face life alone. Romance, marriage, children, these were luxuries for women who could offer a man something more than damaged goods. The next morning, she presented herself downstairs at dawn, dressed in her better of two dresses, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Mrs. Henderson was already at work, her fingers flying through a mending job. She looked up and nodded approvingly. "There is coffee in the pot on the stove. Help yourself, then I will show you the current orders." The work was steady and demanding, exactly what Penelope needed. She lost herself in the rhythm of the needle pulling through fabric, creating beauty from plain cloth. By midday, her fingers ached pleasantly, and she had completed 2 of the simpler orders. Mrs. Henderson said little, but Penelope sensed approval in the older woman's silence. The bell above the door chimed around noon, and Penelope looked up to see a tall man entering the shop. He was in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher: denim pants, a worn cotton shirt, boots that had seen countless miles. But it was his eyes that caught Penelope's attention. Deep brown and startlingly kind, they swept the shop before landing on Mrs. Henderson. "Afternoon, Mrs. Henderson," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep and warm with the slight drawl common to the region. "I came to pick up those shirts you were mending for my ranch hands." "Mr. Harrison, good timing. They are ready." Mrs. Henderson stood, moving to a shelf where wrapped packages waited. "This is my new assistant, Miss Barrett. She arrived from San Antonio yesterday." The man's eyes moved to Penelope, and she braced herself for the usual reaction. His gaze did touch on her scar, but instead of lingering with pity or revulsion, his eyes met hers directly, and he smiled. It was a genuine smile, reaching his eyes, transforming his weather-worn face into something approaching handsome. "Welcome to Brownsville, Miss Barrett. I hope you will find it agreeable." He stepped forward, extending his hand. "Jacob Harrison. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town." Penelope hesitated only a moment before accepting his handshake. His grip was firm but careful, his palm calloused from hard work. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Jacob, please. We do not stand much on formality out here." He collected his package from Mrs. Henderson, paying her from a worn leather wallet. "Mrs. Henderson, I will need to place another order. My sister is coming to visit from Austin next month, and I would like to have some new curtains made for the guest room. Something cheerful. She always complains my house is too plain." Mrs. Henderson's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Bring me the measurements and we will see what can be done. I will drop them by later this week." Jacob settled his hat back on his head, then paused at the door, looking back at Penelope. "Miss Barrett, if you need anything, if anyone gives you trouble in town, you can send word to my ranch. Brownsville is mostly good people, but we get rough types passing through sometimes." The unexpected kindness made Penelope's throat tight. "That is very generous, Mr. Harrison." "Jacob," he corrected gently, then tipped his hat and left. After the door closed, Mrs. Henderson made a thoughtful sound. "Jacob Harrison is one of the good ones. Built his ranch from nothing after his father died 5 years ago. Works harder than any man I have known and treats his people fairly. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties have set their caps for him." Penelope returned to her sewing, ignoring the small flutter in her chest. It did not matter how kind or handsome Jacob Harrison was. Men like him did not end up with women like her. She had learned that lesson well enough in San Antonio, where the young man who had once courted her had fled the moment he saw her face after the bandages came off. The memory still stung, though she told herself she was long past such foolishness. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope proved herself invaluable to Mrs. Henderson, her skill and speed with a needle exceeding even the older woman's expectations. Customers began requesting her specifically for delicate work. She kept to herself, speaking only when necessary, eating her meals alone in her room. It was a quiet existence, but quiet suited her. Jacob Harrison returned 4 days later with measurements scrawled on a piece of paper. Penelope was alone in the shop, Mrs. Henderson having gone to the general store for supplies. She looked up as the bell chimed, her heart giving an unexpected jump when she saw who had entered. "Good afternoon, Miss Barrett." Jacob approached the counter, laying out his paper. "I hope I have done this correctly. I am better with livestock than measuring windows." Penelope studied the numbers, aware of his presence in a way that unsettled her. He smelled of sunshine and leather, and he stood at a respectful distance, not crowding her as some men did. "These measurements look fine, Mr. Harrison." "Did you have a color in mind, Jacob, please?" His smile was patient. "And I confess I have no talent for such decisions. Perhaps you could suggest something." "My sister Sarah is cheerful by nature, always singing. She loves the outdoors." Without thinking, Penelope found herself suggesting, "Something in a butter yellow, then. Light enough to let in the sunshine, but warm. We have a lovely cotton print with small wildflowers that might suit." She pulled out the bolt of fabric, unrolling a length across the counter. Jacob stepped closer to examine it, and his nearness made her pulse quicken in a way she had not felt in years. She stepped back instinctively, putting distance between them. If Jacob noticed her retreat, he gave no sign. He studied the fabric thoughtfully, then nodded. "That is perfect. Sarah will love it. You have a good eye, Miss Barrett." "Penelope," she said, then immediately wondered why she had offered her given name. She never did that. His smile widened. "Penelope, that is a pretty name." She busied herself with calculations, writing up the order with careful precision. "It will take about 2 weeks to complete. Mrs. Henderson will need to approve the final price, but I estimate around $5 for materials and labor. That sounds fair." Jacob counted out a deposit, then hesitated, his hands resting on the counter. "Miss Barrett, Penelope, I wonder if you might answer a question for me, and please forgive me if I overstep." Penelope's defenses rose instantly. Here it came, the inevitable curiosity about her scar, the probing into her past. "I would prefer to keep our relationship strictly professional, Mr. Harrison." "Jacob," he said softly, and there was something in his tone that made her look up despite herself. His brown eyes were serious now, searching her face. "I was only going to ask if you are settling in well. Brownsville can be lonely for newcomers, especially women on their own. My ranch hosts a gathering once a month, nothing fancy, just neighbors coming together for a meal and music. You would be welcome if you would like to come." Of all the things Penelope had expected, it was not that. She found herself momentarily speechless. That is kind, but I do not think I would fit in at such gatherings." "Why not?" The question was direct but not unkind. "I am not." She gestured vaguely at her face, unable to say the words aloud. "I am not suited to social situations." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Penelope, I do not know what happened to you, and I will not ask unless you wish to tell me. But I do know that you deserve the same kindness and community as anyone else. The invitation stands, with no obligation. The next gathering is in 2 weeks, on Saturday evening. If you decide to come, I will send a wagon to collect you." Before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson returned, her arms full of packages. Jacob greeted her pleasantly, confirmed his order, and left with another tip of his hat. Penelope stood frozen at the counter, her heart beating strangely hard. "He invited you to his gathering, did he not?" Mrs. Henderson set down her packages, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "I thought he might. You think I should refuse?" "I think nothing of the sort, Mrs. Henderson began unpacking her supplies. Jacob Harrison is a man who sees clearly. If he invited you, he wants you there. The question is whether you will have the courage to accept. The words stung because they were true. Penelope had become an expert at hiding, at making herself small and unobtrusive. The thought of walking into a gathering of strangers, of enduring their stares and whispers, made her stomach churn with anxiety. Yet some small, stubborn part of her wanted to accept, wanted to see what it felt like to be treated as though she belonged. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Penelope traced her scar in the darkness and thought about destiny. Her mother had believed in it, had often said that everything happened for a reason, that God had a plan even when life seemed senseless. Penelope had stopped believing in such things the night of the fire. If there was a plan, it seemed unnecessarily cruel. Yet she could not deny the strange pull she felt toward Jacob Harrison, the way his kindness had slipped past her carefully constructed walls. The 2 weeks passed quickly, filled with demanding work. Penelope completed the curtains ahead of schedule, taking extra care with every stitch. She told herself it was professional pride, nothing more, but she knew she was lying. She wanted Jacob to be pleased, wanted to see that smile again. On Friday afternoon, with the curtains wrapped and ready, she found herself standing in front of her small mirror, really looking at her reflection for the first time in months. The scar ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a raised line of puckered skin that would never fully fade. It had been worse once, angry and red. Now it was merely a permanent reminder of the worst night of her life. She had learned to see only the scar when she looked in the mirror, but now she forced herself to look at the whole picture. Her eyes were green, her best feature, framed by dark lashes. Her hair was thick and dark brown, her figure trim but curved in the right places. Once she had been called pretty. A knock on her door startled her. Mrs. Henderson's voice called out, "Miss Barrett, you have a visitor." Penelope descended the stairs to find Jacob waiting in the shop, hat in hand. Her pulse jumped at the sight of him. He wore cleaner clothes than usual, his hair freshly trimmed, and he held a small bunch of wildflowers. "Good afternoon, Penelope." His eyes were warm as they met hers. "I came to see if the curtains were ready, but also to bring you these and to remind you about tomorrow's gathering." He extended the flowers, a simple bouquet of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, the kind that grew wild across the Texas landscape. Penelope stared at them, unable to move. No one had given her flowers since before the fire. Her voice caught. "Thank you, but you should not." "I should not what? Bring flowers to a lovely woman I am hoping will accept my invitation." Jacob's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "Please say you will come tomorrow, Penelope. I promise you will be treated with nothing but respect and kindness." Mrs. Henderson, pretending to organize spools of thread nearby, spoke up. "For heaven's sake, girl, say yes. The man is being perfectly proper." Penelope found herself reaching for the flowers, their stems rough against her palm. They smelled of sunshine and open spaces, of a life she had thought forever closed to her. "I will come," she heard herself say, "but I can only stay a short while." Jacob's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That is all I ask. I will send my wagon at 4 o'clock. The gathering starts at 5, but I thought you might like to see the ranch before the others arrive." After he left with his curtains after Mrs. Henderson had gone home for the evening, Penelope sat in her room with the wildflowers in a water glass, wondering what she had done. The sensible thing would be to send word tomorrow that she had changed her mind. But something deeper than sense was pushing her forward, a tiny flame of hope she had thought extinguished long ago. Saturday arrived too quickly and too slowly. Penelope changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out her eyes. She arranged her hair carefully, letting some of it fall forward to partially obscure the scar, then felt foolish and pinned it back firmly. If Jacob wanted her at his gathering, he would see her as she was, scar and all. The wagon arrived precisely at 4, driven by an older Mexican man who introduced himself as Carlos. He had worked for Jacob's father and now served as foreman of the Harrison Ranch. His face was weathered like old leather, but his smile was warm as he helped Penelope onto the wagon seat. "Mr. Jacob, he talks of nothing but your coming," Carlos said as they rolled out of town. "He is very happy you agreed." Penelope was not sure how to respond to that, so she simply held onto the wagon seat as they headed north. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, dotted with mesquite and scrub brush, the land rolling gently toward distant hills. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, sleek animals that represented substantial investment and care. The ranch house appeared as they crested a low rise, and Penelope caught her breath. It was larger than she expected, a well-built structure of stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Corrals and outbuildings surrounded it, everything maintained with obvious care. This was the home of a man who planned to stay, to build something lasting. Jacob emerged from the house as the wagon approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. He had changed into fresh clothes, and his face broke into a smile when he saw Penelope. He helped her down from the wagon with careful hands, his touch sending unexpected warmth through her. "Welcome to my home," he said simply. "I am glad you came." "It is beautiful," Penelope said honestly, looking around. "You have built something impressive here." Pride flickered in his eyes, but also something more vulnerable. "I have tried. It has not been easy building alone, but it is mine. Come, let me show you around before the others arrive." He walked her through the property, pointing out the various corrals and barns, introducing her to the handful of ranch hands who were preparing for the evening's festivities. Everyone greeted her with friendly respect, and if they noticed her scar, they gave no sign that it mattered. Carlos's wife, Maria, was in the kitchen, preparing food that filled the air with mouth-watering aromas. She welcomed Penelope like an old friend, pressing a glass of cool water into her hand. "Mr. Jacob is a good man," Maria said in heavily accented English. "He needs a good woman, someone who sees his heart." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am just here for the gathering, Mrs. Maria. Mr. Harrison is only being kind." Maria made a dismissive sound. "You think I do not see? I have eyes." "He looks at you like a man who has found water in the desert." Before Penelope could respond, Jacob appeared in the doorway. "Are you filling her head with your romantic notions, Maria?" "Only the truth," Maria replied, unrepentant. "Now out of my kitchen, both of you, I have work to do." Jacob led Penelope out to the porch, where the evening breeze had begun to cool the fierce heat of the day. They sat in rocking chairs, looking out over the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. For several minutes neither spoke, and Penelope found the silence comfortable rather than awkward. "I must confess something," Jacob said finally. "When I first saw you in Mrs. Henderson's shop, I felt as though I had been struck by lightning." Penelope's heart stuttered. "Mr. Harrison, I do not think—" "Jacob, please. And I know this is forward of me, but I am not a man who believes in wasting time with games." He turned in his chair to face her, his expression earnest. "I am 30 years old, Penelope. I have built this ranch through years of hard work, and it has given me satisfaction. But a ranch is not a life. I have been looking for someone to share this with, someone who understands that beauty is more than what shows on the surface." "You do not know me," Penelope whispered, fear and hope warring in her chest. "You do not know what I have been through, what I am like. Then tell me, help me know you. Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand gently. I see a woman who is strong, who has survived something difficult. I see skill and kindness and intelligence. I see someone who has convinced herself she is not worthy of being seen at all. But I see you, Penelope, and what I see makes me want to know more. Tears burned Penelope's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. When I was 18, our house caught fire in the middle of the night. My parents died. I barely escaped but the flames. She touched her scar with her free hand. This is what remains. The man I was courting, he could not bear to look at me afterward. I have spent 6 years learning to be invisible because being seen only brings pain. Jacob's hand tightened on hers, warm and steady. Then he was a fool who did not deserve you. And I am sorry you were hurt so badly that you stopped believing in your own worth. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. My mother died when I was 15. My father never recovered from losing her. He worked himself to death because living without her was too painful. I watched him fade away, and I swore I would never be that way. If I was blessed enough to find love, I would fight for it, treasure it, never take a single day for granted. Is that what you think this is? Penelope's voice trembled. Love, I think it could be, if you will give it a chance. Give me a chance. Jacob stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. I know this is sudden. I know you have every reason to be cautious. I am only asking that you let me prove I am not like the fool who hurt you. Let me show you how I see you. Before Penelope could respond, the sound of approaching wagons made them both turn. The guests were arriving, families and single folk from neighboring ranches and town. Jacob released her hand reluctantly, and Penelope felt the loss of his warmth like a physical thing. The gathering was unlike anything Penelope had experienced. There was music from a fiddle and guitar, children running and playing in the twilight, tables laden with food. Jacob stayed close to her side, introducing her to everyone with a quiet pride that made her heart ache. If people noticed her scar, they followed Jacob's lead and treated her as though it did not matter. She found herself laughing at a story told by one of the ranchers, accepting a plate of Maria's excellent cooking, even joining in a simple dance when Jacob asked her with such hope in his eyes that she could not refuse. As they moved through the steps of the dance, Jacob's hand firm on her waist, Penelope felt something long frozen inside her begin to thaw. She looked up at his face and saw him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. It was the way a man looked at a woman he was falling for, and the realization sent both terror and exhilaration through her. "You are beautiful when you smile," Jacob said softly, his words meant only for her. "I hope to see you do it often." "Jacob, I am afraid," she admitted, the truth spilling out. "I am afraid to believe this is real. I know, but I am patient and I am stubborn. I will wait as long as it takes for you to trust this, to trust me." His hand tightened on her waist, drawing her infinitesimally closer. "I meant what I said earlier. From the moment I saw you, I felt something I have never felt before. It was as though everything suddenly made sense, as though I had been searching without knowing it and finally found what I was looking for. Destiny." The word came out half mocking, half hopeful. "Yes," Jacob said simply. "Destiny." The evening stretched long, filled with warmth and laughter. When Carlos finally drove Penelope back to town under a sky brilliant with stars, she felt as though she were living in a dream. Jacob had asked if he could call on her, properly court her, and she had said yes. The word had felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and freeing all at once. Over the following weeks, Jacob became a constant presence in her life. He came to town 3 or 4 times a week, always with some excuse and order to place, a question about the curtains, supplies to purchase from the general store. But his true purpose was always to see Penelope, to spend whatever time he could in her presence. They took walks along the Rio Grande in the evening cool, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to breed better cattle, his hope to build a proper school in Brownsville. She found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing her love of books, her satisfaction in creating beautiful things with her hands, even her nightmares about the fire. "They will fade," Jacob told her one evening as they sat on a bench near the river. "Perhaps not completely, but they will lose their power over you. Time and happiness are the best medicines for old wounds." "How did you become so wise?" Penelope asked, only half teasing. "Years of talking to cattle," Jacob replied with a grin. "They are excellent listeners and never argue back." Penelope laughed, and Jacob's eyes lit up at the sound. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. His thumb traced the bottom of her scar, gentle and deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. "Does it hurt when I touch it?" he asked softly. "No." "It has not hurt in years, not physically," she swallowed hard. "But no one has touched it like that before, as though it does not matter." "It does not matter, Penelope. Not to me. It is part of you, part of your story, but it is not all of you. It is not even the most important part." Jacob's hand cupped her cheek, warm and sure. "I am going to kiss you now, if you will allow it." Penelope's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had been kissed before, a lifetime ago, by the boy who had later rejected her. But this was different. Jacob was different. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Jacob leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. His lips met hers gently, a question and a promise all at once. Penelope's eyes fluttered closed, and she leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. His heart beat strong beneath her palm, steady as the man himself. The kiss deepened, and Penelope felt something inside her crack and fall away, some last barrier she had been holding on to. When they finally pulled apart, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Penelope Barrett, I am falling in love with you. I need you to know that, Jacob." Her voice broke. "I think I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me." "Love should be a little terrifying. It means we have something precious to protect." He kissed her forehead, tender and sweet. "But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to prove worthy of your trust." The courtship continued through the summer months, proper but passionate. Jacob was respectful of Penelope's reputation, always ensuring they were chaperoned or in public view, but his feelings were never in doubt. He looked at her as though she were the most precious thing he had ever seen, and slowly, painfully, Penelope began to believe it might be true. In August, Jacob's sister Sarah arrived for her promised visit, a whirlwind of energy and warmth. She took one look at Penelope and declared her perfect for Jacob, much to her brother's embarrassment and Penelope's shock. Sarah stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time she left, she and Penelope had become fast friends. Sarah's acceptance meant more to Penelope than she could express. It was proof that Jacob's family could welcome her, that she might truly belong in his world. One evening in late September, as the oppressive heat finally began to ease, Jacob asked Penelope to come to the ranch. He sent Carlos with the wagon, and Penelope found herself nervous in a way she had not been since that first gathering. Something felt different about this invitation, weighted with significance. Jacob met her at the door, dressed in his best clothes, his hair freshly washed. He took her hand and led her not to the porch but inside, to a room she had never entered. It was clearly his bedroom, and Penelope hesitated. "Jacob, I should not look," he said gently, pointing to the windows, her breath caught. The curtains she had made hung in the windows, but they were not the yellow fabric meant for the guest room. These were a soft cream color, embroidered with wildflowers in green and gold thread. They were the most beautiful work she had ever done, crafted late at night in her room above the shop, a labor of love she had not admitted even to herself. When did you? She could not finish the question. I asked Mrs. Henderson if you were working on anything special. She showed me these and said you had been making them in your free time. I bought them from her yesterday. Jacob moved to stand before her, taking both her hands. Penelope, this is the master bedroom, my room. I wanted you to see it like this because I hope someday it will be our room. Penelope's eyes flooded with tears. Jacob. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. When he opened it, a simple gold band set with a small diamond glinted in the lamplight. Marry me, Penelope. Make this house a home. Make me the happiest man in Texas. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone, and I promise to spend the rest of my life proving it. Yes, Penelope whispered, then louder. Yes, Jacob, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his cheek against her hair. I worried you might say no. I worried I was rushing you. You are rushing me, Penelope said with a shaky laugh. But I find I do not care. I spent 6 years believing I would never have this, never have love or a home or a future with someone. I am not going to let fear steal this from me now. They sat on the porch as the sun set, making plans. Jacob wanted to marry soon, before winter arrived. Penelope agreed. There was no reason to wait, no family to notify beyond Sarah, who would be delighted. They would have a simple ceremony in Brownsville's small church, followed by a celebration at the ranch. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Henderson insisted on making Penelope's wedding dress. A gift, she said, was long overdue for her best worker. The dress was beautiful, soft ivory cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, modest but elegant. Penelope stood for multiple fittings, still sometimes shocked when she looked down at the engagement ring on her finger. The whole town seemed to have taken an interest in the upcoming wedding. The general store owner offered to donate flowers, the baker promised a cake, and several of the neighboring ranchers' wives came by the shop to introduce themselves properly and welcome Penelope to their community. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. For the first time since the fire, Penelope felt as though she belonged somewhere, was wanted somewhere. Sarah arrived 3 days before the wedding, full of excited plans and sisterly affection. She stayed at the ranch, helping Maria prepare food for the celebration and decorating the house with wildflowers and ribbons. The night before the wedding, she insisted Penelope stay in town, claiming it was bad luck for the groom to see the bride. Though knowing my brother, he is probably pacing the porch right now, counting the hours, Sarah said with a laugh. She had come to stay with Penelope in the room above the shop, bringing wine and pastries for a small celebration. He really loves you, you know. I have never seen him like this. He is absolutely smitten. I love him too, Penelope said softly, still marveling that she could say those words and mean them. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone. Sarah studied her seriously. He told me about your scar, about what you survived. I hope you do not mind. No, I do not mind. You are his sister. Of course he would tell you. He also told me what you believed about yourself, that no one could love you. Sarah reached out and took Penelope's hand. I want you to know something. My brother is the best man I know. He is kind and loyal and honest to a fault. When he loves completely. He will never make you doubt your worth, never make you feel less than cherished. You are getting a good man, Penelope. I know, Penelope said, her voice thick with emotion. I do not know what I did to deserve him, but I will spend the rest of my life being grateful." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the October sky a brilliant blue. Penelope dressed with Sarah's help, her hands trembling as she buttoned the ivory dress. When she looked in the mirror, she saw something she had not seen in years. A bride, hopeful and happy, ready to start a new life. The church was small but packed with people, far more than Penelope had expected. It seemed everyone in Brownsville and the surrounding ranches had come to witness Jacob Harrison marry his beloved. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Carlos and Maria beamed from their seats, dressed in their finest clothes. But Penelope had eyes only for Jacob, standing at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face lit with such joy that it took her breath away. As she walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, Jacob's eyes never left her face. When she reached his side, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You are breathtaking," he whispered. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Jacob he could kiss his bride, Jacob cupped Penelope's face gently and kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation audibly sighed. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Jacob never strayed far from Penelope's side, his hand often resting at the small of her back, his eyes constantly seeking hers across the room. When the last guests finally departed and they stood alone on the porch in the moonlight, Penelope felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. Jacob seemed to sense it. He took her hand and led her inside, through the house to the bedroom with the curtains she had made. A lamp burned low on the bedside table, casting warm light across the room. "We will go at whatever pace you need," Jacob said softly, turning to face her. "There is no rush, Penelope. We have the rest of our lives." Penelope looked at her husband, a word she was still getting used to, and felt the last of her fear melt away. This was Jacob, who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath, who had pursued her with patience and kindness, who had convinced her that love was not only possible but inevitable. She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw beneath her palm. "I am not afraid," she said truthfully. "Not with you." Jacob kissed her slowly, deeply, and Penelope surrendered to the moment, to him, to the future they would build together. Much later, lying in his arms with her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Penelope thought about destiny. Perhaps her mother had been right. Perhaps there was a plan, even when it seemed cruel. Because every painful step had led her here, to this man, to this moment, to this life she had stopped believing was possible. "What are you thinking?" Jacob's voice was drowsy, his hand stroking her hair. "That I was wrong," Penelope said, "about so many things. I believed nobody could love me, but you proved me wrong. I believed my life was over, but it was only beginning." Jacob's arms tightened around her. "I knew from the first moment that you were meant to be mine. I do not believe in coincidence, Penelope. I believe we were always going to find each other." "Destiny," Penelope murmured. "Destiny," Jacob agreed. The winter passed in contentment. Penelope settled into life as a rancher's wife, finding unexpected joy in the daily rhythms. She continued her sewing, taking special orders from town. But now she worked in a room Jacob had set up for her, with good light and plenty of storage for supplies. The ranch hands treated her with respect and affection, and Maria became more than a housekeeper. She became a friend and surrogate mother. In February, Penelope realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be certain, then told Jacob one evening as they sat before the fire. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, careful of her newly fragile condition, his face radiant with joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are having a baby." Penelope felt tears on her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She had thought she would never have this, never carry a child or raise a family. Now she placed Jacob's hand on her still flat stomach and said, "Our baby. Part you, part me, all ours." The pregnancy progressed easily. Penelope felt well, blooming under Jacob's devoted attention. He insisted she rest more, worried constantly about her health. Sarah came to visit for several weeks that spring, full of excitement about becoming an aunt. She brought baby clothes she had already begun sewing and talked endlessly about names. On a warm September day, exactly a year after Jacob had proposed, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but Maria was there to help, and Jacob refused to leave her side despite the usual custom of men staying away. He held Penelope's hand through every contraction, wiped her forehead, murmured encouragement when she wanted to give up. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and perfect, the doctor placed him in Penelope's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, seeing Jacob in the shape of his eyes, herself in his dark hair, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "We have a son," she said to Jacob, who was staring at the baby with wonder. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered. He reached out a tentative finger and the baby's tiny hand closed around it. "He has a strong grip. He will be a rancher like his father." They named him James Harrison after Jacob's father. The baby was a delight, easy-tempered and healthy. Jacob proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son for hours as though he could not quite believe he was real. The ranch continued to prosper. Jacob's careful breeding program paid off with strong calves, and he was able to hire more hands and expand his herds. Penelope's sewing business grew as well, with women coming from as far as San Antonio to order her custom work. She took pride in contributing to the family finances, and Jacob never once suggested she should stop working. He valued her independence and skill, often telling anyone who would listen how talented his wife was. When James was 2 years old, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, leaving her tired and ill for the first few months. Jacob worried constantly, but Penelope assured him she was fine. In the spring of 1880, she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny thing with Jacob's brown eyes and a surprisingly loud cry. "She will be a force to be reckoned with," Maria predicted, and she was right. They named her Rose, and she proved to be everything her name suggested: beautiful, delicate in appearance but surprisingly hardy. James adored his little sister, following her everywhere once she began to crawl, appointed himself her protector. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Jacob continued to build the ranch into one of the most successful in the region. Penelope's reputation as a seamstress spread throughout South Texas. They built a small schoolhouse in Brownsville, hiring a teacher and offering education to any child whose family could not afford tuition. It was important to both of them to give back to the community that had welcomed Penelope so warmly. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Penelope with a trip to San Antonio. It was the first time she had returned since leaving, and she felt anxiety fluttering in her stomach as the train pulled into the station. Jacob sensed her nervousness and took her hand. "We do not have to stay long. I simply wanted to give you good memories of this place, to replace the painful ones." They stayed in the best hotel, ate in fine restaurants, visited the missions and markets. On the third day, Penelope asked to see her old neighborhood. Jacob hired a carriage, and they drove through streets she had not seen in over a decade. The lot where her family home had stood was now occupied by a new building, and Penelope felt a complicated mixture of sadness and relief. The past was truly past. That evening, as they prepared to return to Brownsville, Penelope turned to Jacob with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for this. I thought facing my past would be painful, but instead I see how far I have come. How different my life is now because of you." "You give me too much credit," Jacob said, pulling her into his embrace. "You were always strong, always worthy of love. I simply had the good fortune to see it." They returned home to find James, now 12, had successfully managed several ranch tasks in his father's absence, determined to prove himself capable. Rose, at 10 years old, had organized a concert with the ranch hands' children, complete with handmade costumes and programs. Both children threw themselves into their parents' arms, talking over each other in their excitement to share everything that had happened. As the years continued to pass, the Harrisons became pillars of the Brownsville community. Jacob served on the town council, working to bring improvements like a proper doctor's office and better roads. Penelope opened a small school for girls, teaching them not just sewing but reading, writing, and arithmetic, believing that women deserved education as much as men. James grew into a young man much like his father, honest, hardworking, with a natural way with animals. He took over more and more of the ranch operations, displaying an instinct for breeding and business that made Jacob proud. Rose inherited her mother's creativity and her father's determination, declaring at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher. She attended the new teachers' college in Austin, sending letters home filled with her adventures and discoveries. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jacob and Penelope sat on their porch in the evening cool, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their hair showed threads of silver now, and their faces bore the lines of lives well lived. Jacob reached over and took Penelope's hand, lacing their fingers together as he had done countless times over the years. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Saying yes to me, taking a chance on this life?" Penelope turned to look at her husband, seeing the young rancher who had walked into a seamstress shop and seen past her scars to her soul. "Not for a single moment. You taught me that love was not something I had to earn or deserve. It was simply there, waiting for me to have the courage to accept it. You were always my destiny," Jacob said. "From the first moment I saw you, I knew. And you were mine," Penelope replied, squeezing his hand. "I just did not know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. The ranch was quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of evening insects. It was a peace they had built together, a life they had created from faith and hope and stubborn determination. Inside the house, lamps were being lit. They could hear Maria singing as she prepared dinner, a melody in Spanish that had become as familiar as home. Soon James would come in from the range, hungry and full of stories about the day's work. Rose was due home from Austin next week for summer break, and the house would fill with her laughter and enthusiasm. "We should go in," Penelope said, but neither of them moved. These moments were precious, stolen time in lives that were full and busy and endlessly rewarding. "In a moment," Jacob said. He lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so familiar it made Penelope's heart ache with love. "I want to sit here a little longer with my wife, counting my blessings." "How many blessings have you counted?" Penelope asked, smiling. "I have stopped counting. There are too many." Jacob pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, fitting against his side as though she had been made to be there. "But if I had to name the greatest, it would be the day you walked into Mrs. Henderson's shop and into my life. The day I stopped believing I was unlovable," Penelope said softly. "The day you showed me a different future was possible." As full darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, they finally rose and walked into their home together, hand in hand. The house welcomed them with warmth and light, with the smell of good food and the promise of family. It was everything Penelope had thought lost to her, everything she had believed she would never have. But Jacob had seen what she could not see in herself, had loved her when she could not love herself, had built with her a life beyond what either of them could have imagined alone. In the years that followed, they watched their children grow into remarkable adults. James married a kind woman from a neighboring ranch and gave them 3 grandchildren who delighted in visiting their grandparents' ranch. Rose became a beloved teacher in Austin but returned home often, eventually falling in love with a young lawyer who shared her passion for education reform. Their wedding in Brownsville was the social event of the year. Jacob and Penelope grew old together gracefully, still holding hands on the porch each evening, still finding new ways to show their love. When Jacob's hair went completely silver and his hands grew stiff with arthritis, Penelope rubbed salve into his joints and read to him by lamplight. When Penelope's eyesight began to fail, making her detailed needlework difficult, Jacob hired a young woman to assist her and sat nearby while she worked, just to be close. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become legendary in the region, the rancher who had pursued his destined love, and the scarred woman who had learned to believe she was worthy of being loved. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, children running through the house just as James and Rose once had. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Jacob and Penelope found themselves once again alone on the porch, older now but still together, still in love. Penelope's scar had faded to a thin silver line, just one of many marks that life had left on their bodies, but it no longer held power over her. It was simply part of her history, something that had happened long ago to a young woman who had believed herself unlovable. 40 years, Jacob said, his voice rough with age but still warm with affection. 40 years, and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. That hardly seems possible, Penelope replied, but she was smiling. You looked at me with such devotion that day, I thought my heart would burst. It was nothing compared to how I look at you now. Jacob turned to face her, his weathered hands cupping her face with the same tenderness he had shown the first time he kissed her. You are the love of my life, Penelope Harrison, my destiny, my home, my everything. Penelope felt tears on her cheeks, but they were happy tears, just as they had been on their wedding day. And you are mine. You taught me to believe in love when I had given up hope. You gave me a life more beautiful than I ever imagined possible. They sat together as the Texas stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding night, countless evenings of contentment. The ranch stretched around them, solid and enduring, built on love and determination. Their children were settled and happy. Their grandchildren would carry their legacy forward. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of during those early days of courtship when the future was uncertain but full of promise. As the years continued to pass, Jacob and Penelope remained devoted to each other until the very end. They lived to see their grandchildren grown and beginning families of their own. They watched Brownsville transform from a rough frontier town into a thriving community. The ranch remained in the family, passed to James when Jacob finally decided to retire fully, though he still walked the property daily with Penelope at his side. On a warm spring morning when Jacob was 73 and Penelope was 70, they sat on their porch with coffee and watched the sunrise together. It was a ritual they had maintained for over 40 years, this quiet time before the day began, just the two of them and the dawn. "I have been thinking," Jacob said, his voice still strong despite his age, "about the day I first saw you in Mrs. Henderson's shop." "You think about that often," Penelope observed with a smile. "Why today particularly?" "Because I want you to know that I would do it all again, exactly the same way. The courting, the waiting, the patience it took to convince you that you were worthy of love. Every moment was worth it to have this life with you." Penelope set down her coffee and took his hand. After all these years, his touch still sent warmth through her, still made her feel cherished and seen. "I would do it all again, too. Even the fear, even the doubts, because they led me here to you, to this beautiful life we built together." They lived several more years in peace and contentment, surrounded by family and friends. When Jacob finally passed away at 78, Penelope was holding his hand, just as she had held it through so many moments of their life together. His last words were, "Thank you for being my destiny." Penelope lived 2 more years after Jacob's death, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days sewing less intricate items that her failing eyesight could manage, telling stories of the old days to anyone who would listen, always returning to the tale of the rancher who had seen past her scars and loved her anyway. She spoke of him with such devotion that her grandchildren grew up believing in the kind of love that transcends obstacles, the kind of love worth waiting for. On the morning Penelope died, her children found her in her bed with a peaceful expression on her face, her hand resting on a pillow that had been Jacob's. On her nightstand was their wedding photograph, faded now but still showing a young couple gazing at each other with unmistakable love. Tucked beneath the frame was a note she had written years earlier, to be opened after her death. James read it aloud to his sister at their mother's funeral, his voice breaking with emotion. "To my beloved children, I want you to know that my life was full beyond measure. I was blessed to find a man who taught me that love is not about perfection, but about seeing and accepting each other completely. Your father loved me when I could not love myself, and in doing so, he gave me the courage to become the woman I was meant to be. Teach your children about this kind of love. Tell them that destiny is real, that the right person will see past scars and fears to the heart beneath. Tell them that their grandmother believed nobody could love her, but the rancher believed she was his destiny, and he was right. Love with your whole heart, as your father and I loved each other. It is the greatest gift life offers." They buried Penelope next to Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Texas sky they had both loved. Their grandchildren planted wildflowers around the graves, the same blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush that Jacob had brought Penelope on one of their first meetings. Every spring, the flowers bloomed in brilliant colors, a living reminder of a love story that had transformed 2 lives and blessed countless others. The ranch continued for generations, always staying in the Harrison family. The house where Jacob and Penelope had built their life remained standing, carefully maintained by their descendants. The room with the cream-colored curtains embroidered with wildflowers was preserved exactly as it had been, a shrine to the love that had begun there. And on quiet evenings, when the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, family members would gather on the porch where Jacob and Penelope had spent so many hours together. They would tell the story of the scarred seamstress who believed she was unlovable, and the rancher who knew better, who pursued her with patience and kindness until she could see herself through his eyes. It became a legend in the family, a reminder that true love sees not what is broken but what is beautiful, not what is damaged but what is whole. The story of Jacob and Penelope Harrison became woven into the fabric of Brownsville itself, passed down through generations as an example of love conquering fear, of faith overcoming doubt, of destiny finding a way despite all obstacles. And though the years passed and times changed, the essence of their story remained constant. That love, real love, sees past the surface to the soul beneath. And that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is helping them see their own worth through our eyes.